Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Lisa Beth Kovetz. In this very special at home with Lisa version of Science Goes to the Movies, we're going to look at the very unexpected dystopian saga called Our Reality Today, which unfortunately is not fictional. And because reality has become a little too much like a movie, just for this episode, we're going to skip over the comparisons of science to fiction and focus on the real thing that's happening now. The amazing scientists who contribute to the show have excellent insights into our current situation that they're eager to share. Later in the show, Dr. Natalie Brito, NYU pediatric neuroscientist, has tips and thoughts on helping your children or your lab cope with the quarantine. And up first, Dr. Larry Wells, Kaiser Permanente ER physician and all-around frontline guy in this pandemic, is back with his thoughts on what's happening, what to expect, and what's expected of us. Here's the interview. Hello and welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for taking some time to answer our question.
You're very welcome, Lisa Beth. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Wells, the beginning of COVID-19 symptoms are very much the same as a cold or the flu. How do I know if I'm really sick?
Usually about a week after having, say, mild onset of disease, they progress into a second phase in which the disease can be overwhelming, and the main symptoms that we look for are fever, cough, and shortness of breath.
On an absolutely practical level, at what point should I call a doctor?
So what we are telling people is if you have mild symptoms, if you have a little fever, body aches, feel like you have a cold or flu, and you think you have COVID-19, we actually do not want you to come to the hospital. We want those that are developing signs of severe respiratory distress, high fever, terrible chest pain, and in general feel as if they are getting sicker. We want those people to come to the hospitals and emergency departments in order to be evaluated. We do not want the hospitals to be overwhelmed. And currently we are being overwhelmed, and based on the epidemiology of this disease, it frankly is going to get worse.
Dr. Wells, should I keep away from hospitals and emergency rooms if I'm not COVID-19 sick?
Well, we never want to deny or limit the access to the emergency department. So again, you're going to have to use your judgment. If you have an obvious reason for which you feel you need to come to the emergency department, let's say you fall and you've broken your arm and you feel that you need to have it evaluated, by all means come to the emergency department. However, in this time of the pandemic and the public health crisis that we're in, we're asking people to really use your judgment. And if you feel that this is a problem, a medical problem for which I can seek medical attention later and not go emergently and use the emergency department as your 24-hour walk-in clinic just to get checked out, please do not do that. And fortunately, here in Los Angeles, we've been seeing that. We've been seeing, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, anecdotally, throughout the nation, there's been a drop in non-COVID related emergency department cases. And the public does seem to be heeding our advice to please stay away from the emergency department if you have a true non-emergent medical issue.
Also because you don't want to be where the sick people are right now.
Exactly, that's another issue. You do not want to be exposed to the sick people.
Larry, let's talk a little bit about the practicalities of masks. I have a construction mask and the N99 mask, though it's 7 years old. Both of these masks are 7 years old. What's the difference between these and a surgical mask, and how do you make them work?
One issue that really should be discussed is that for the general public, it is not recommended that you actually use an N95. You have to be fit tested in order to maximize its utility. If you do not have a properly fitting N95 mask, you still have potential entries where the virus can get in. So it's been recommended, because of the issue of improper fitting and improper usage of something like a medical N95, that really masking with a surgical mask or a facial covering, and try to make certain that the cover of your face and the sides are not too open. Some masks are very open and they just hang. Something's better than nothing. So any type of barrier is better than nothing at all.
And I understand you're wearing masks in your home.
Being a hospital worker, I could potentially have an asymptomatic case, and therefore we don't wear masks all the time around the house, but if we think we're going to be in close contact, I have actually given masks to my wife and daughter and myself. Now, bottom line, wear some type of protection. My mantra in the hospital and out of the hospital is assume everyone is positive. Don't take a risk. You wear some type of protective mask, be it surgical or even a cloth homemade mask, which are now becoming more and more popular. If you're going out into the public, you have to minimize your risk.
And what about gloves? What's your opinion on gloves right now?
Most people don't know how to use them properly. After touching a potentially contaminated surface, you should actually take those gloves off and discard them because they're potentially contaminated. COVID-19 is not transmitted through your skin. You're not trying to protect your skin. What you're trying to do is limit the potential exposure of COVID-19 into your respiratory passages. So as long as you're not touching your face, as long as you are discarding those gloves and utilizing them in the appropriate fashion, which most people do not do, gloves are protective, but really the recommendation is masking and washing your hands.
Larry, I understand that not all of the protective gear is so high tech in the ER these days.
Here is our current high-tech medical equipment that is being used.
What is that?
Basically, this is a paper bag. The coronavirus has been shown to survive in a porous cardboard or paper type bag for about 24 hours, whereas on other surfaces, plastic, stainless steel, it can last for as long as 3 days. So a lot of us, in order to help decrease the burden of the protective equipment shortage, we are recycling our masks, particularly N95s and other protective gear, by cleaning them, placing them in a paper bag, and not reusing them for at least 1 to 3 days, sometimes longer.
After the doctors and nurses who are on the front line of this war, it does seem like soap, just plain old soap, is the big hero of the situation. What is it about soap?
Well, Lisa Beth, soap is to the coronavirus as kryptonite is to Superman. But it isn't the magical properties of soap. It's actually science. Basically, what soap does is break down the membrane that's protecting the viral DNA, which is like a ball inside a greasy lipid bilayer that soap breaks down and will actually kill the virus. However, you have to wash your hands very thoroughly. You have to wash the surfaces. You have to get underneath your nails, in between your fingers. And you have to do it, it has been shown that you have to do it for at least 20 seconds. And that will allow that soap to attack that greasy protective wall and break it down. And it is much more effective than hand sanitizer. Everyone wants hand sanitizer. Hand sanitizer is being sold, I've seen, for hundreds of dollars, and it's being hoarded. But it isn't quite as effective as soap.
What is it about alcohol? And when we say alcohol, are we talking about my really good scotch, or is this a special kind of alcohol?
You basically need an alcohol content of at least 60%. And I don't think you'd want to use your good single malt scotch, particularly because it's not going to help. Although I have some single malts that are 62%. Vodka is probably 40%. Scotch is somewhere between 40 and 60%. And in the end, soap is the most effective way to attack that membrane.
In movies, antidotes and vaccines happen so fast that they're practically magical. Why is it going to take so long to get a vaccine for this virus?
Well, relatively speaking, it's not taking that long because we've seen types of coronaviruses with previous pandemics, such as the SARS outbreak in 2004 and the MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, in 2012. We actually have a bit of a head start in determining exactly how to develop a vaccine. However, this is not an overnight process. Right now, there are numerous labs rushing to develop a vaccine, but it does take time. But fortunately, we have had a little bit of a head start.
Larry, as a doctor and as a father, are you frightened?
Yes, to some degree. I try to take my own personal fears and channel them into approaching this battle that we're faced with intelligence and science, as opposed to emotion, hearsay. And really, I think if we approach this epidemic, pandemic, this current scourge that we're facing with science and a good basis of scientific fact and knowledge, as opposed to mysticism and political rhetoric, I think that we will do just fine. But it is a fearful time in all of our lives.
Dr. Wells, as individuals, what can we do to help?
Really, the best thing that you can do is stay home and practice social distancing. Really and truly, the only way that you can transmit a virus is from person to person. And if you stay away from people, that's going to limit the major mode of transmission of this virus. So the first thing that you can do to help us out is to stay home and practice social distancing. Again, we're trying to flatten the curve. We're essentially trying to keep the hospitals from becoming overwhelmed right now. And unfortunately, hospitals are becoming overwhelmed in certain locations, particularly, unfortunately, like New York. So staying at home, practicing social distancing, looking out for your neighbors right now is really important. You may have some elderly neighbors, and keeping tabs on them, making sure that they're doing fine. And just not going out in public is really the biggest way to help combat this disease.
Dr. Wells, I know you're tired and I know you're working hard, and thank you so much for taking some time to clarify these things for us.
Really, it's my pleasure. I hope I was able to impart some idea out to the general public as what they can do to help us help them. And right now is a critical time, and I hope everyone stays safe, stay home, and we'll make it through.
Pediatric neuroscientist Dr. Natalie Brito studies the impact of the home environment on an infant's cognitive and language skills in the first 2 years of life. Given our current quarantine, studies of the home environment seem more important than ever. So we've asked her back to share her thoughts on best practices in these difficult times. Dr. Brito, welcome to the show.
Thanks for the invitation.
We all love putting funny hats on babies, but what exactly have you got going on here in this picture?
So in this picture, the baby's wearing an EEG cap, or electroencephalography, and we use EEG to measure brain activity in infants because it's completely non-invasive, right? It doesn't hurt the baby. And most infants tolerate it pretty well. In the cap, there are these little metal discs that rest on the scalp, and they're called electrodes. And they detect tiny electrical charges that result from activity in the brain. So it's a good way to look at brain activity in infants and kind of see how that links with behavior.
As a parent who's also a neuroscientist, are you worried about how this period will affect your child's development?
I think all parents right now are really worried about their kids in a lot of different ways and for different reasons. First and foremost, we're worried about their health and safety, right? So besides child development. So I have a 2-year-old, his name is Bodhi, and there's lots of challenges at 2. They're terrible 2s, temper tantrums. Fortunately, my son's really verbal, so he understands a lot. But the world's a little bit upside down right now. From the science, we know that young children do pick up on stress cues within the environment. And I think I've seen that with my own child. He doesn't express those fears, but sometimes he chews on his stuffed animal or he's been a little agitated. But I really do think that with support, kids can adapt. They're really, really resilient. And they can get through some of these tough times. Kind of what keeps me up at night right now, what worries me are, the moms who are kind of running out of formula for their infants, or kids who don't have safe places to run around. And we know that in times of crises like this, there's an increased risk of child abuse or neglect. And so we know that kids and families are really struggling right now. So I'm pretty safe and secure with my child, but I really am worried about the kids who are really hit hardest by this pandemic.
As a parent and a scientist, how would you suggest people talk to their children about COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not going to claim to have all the answers, but I think the first step really is not so much talking, but maybe listening, right? And observing your child's cues. Kids are getting information from a lot of different sources right now. Some of them are accurate, some of them are not. Sometimes they hear things on the news that they don't really understand. And so I think what we first need to do is kind of listen to them, see where they're at, get an understanding of what they understand from the situation. And then, try to find ways to explain the situation, right? I think the best thing to do is not keep things a mystery, but to try to explain to kids, even as kids as young as 2. Increased communication is really what's needed right now. So just to give you an example with my son, we've been telling him things like the city is sick because there's germs right now. We're waiting for the city to get cleaned up. And then once that happens, we can go outside. These are some ideas that my son kind of grasps even as a toddler, right? So he understands the concept of being sick because he's been sick before. He's seen me be sick. He understands the concept of cleanup. Well, he doesn't follow cleanup very well, but he understands what it means. And so we're trying to break down something as, huge as a pandemic or a quarantine into like little bits and information that they might understand, may help them process it a little bit better. But I think that's what works for my family. Other families where there are bigger consequences of COVID, like losing jobs or sick family members, I think then it becomes much harder to talk about kids about those topics.
Like a lot of people my age, I grew up with a very unscheduled childhood, and kind of the current situation has slammed us back into that world. What are your thoughts on the spectrum of boredom and how it might affect a kid stuck inside for a long period of time?
I also grew up with a very unscheduled childhood. I went outside and my mom didn't know what time I was coming back. But I think the big difference between like our childhood and what's happening right now is 1, the lack of access to the outdoors, and 2, kind of this ability to connect with friends outside of technology, right? And so we might have had a lot of unscheduled time, but it wasn't constrained the way it is right now. Looking through some of the science literature, I think technology can be an asset, right? So we use FaceTime to chat with friends and family a lot more than we did during before the pandemic. There are lots of free online resources for teaching kids how to draw or, do yoga. We watch penguins at the aquarium through their, animal camera. And so I think you can find ways of filling your days with different types of activity. But it really depends on who's at home with the child, what resources they have access to. And then really just, trying to be creative and finding ways to pass the time.
Developmentally, is there any upside to this confinement, and how can families find that upside?
I think there is. Again, I can't speak for all families, but I know for my family that this experience has really reaffirmed kind of, what's important to each of us, right? So quarantine is not clearly an ideal situation. But important to us are that we are all kind of safe and healthy, right? And that we have each other. So there are definitely moments where I'm stressed out about my work. But But on the other hand, I'm actually really grateful for a lot of the time that I'm getting to spend with my son that I usually don't. So I hope that, my family and then other families who do find this upside can really carry this with them post-quarantine.
I read in your work that you often refer to the home linguistic environment. What is that?
It's a fancy way of just saying the language interactions in the home. So children and caregivers talking to each other, languages or types of different types of languages heard in the home, even nonverbal types of communication, right? It doesn't have to be talking. It's just the types of communication. And so I'm really interested in how babies learn from all these different types of language inputs, and then how it shapes their development.
Does it matter at all which language a child is hearing at home?
So the short answer is no. So some babies grow up hearing one language, other babies grow up hearing two. There's even some babies who grow up hearing three or more languages or dialects in the world. So it doesn't matter, what language they speak or how many languages, but what I always really encourage parents is that they speak their native language. Because some families are often given misinformed advice that if you expose your young child to multiple languages, it will somehow delay their, child's ability to learn languages. Or that sometimes for immigrant families are sometimes told not to speak their native language at home and to only speak English, because that's going to be the language of schooling, right? And so to really give your kids a heads up, or a head start, you really should just speak English in the home. But from my work and then the work of many, many others in the field, these bilingual myths are really not true. Studies have shown that children who are really strong in their first language, no matter what it is, this actually helps them to learn English later in school, right? And speaking the native or the heritage language in the home is actually really good for promoting cultural ties within the family. It really keeps generations together. It helps to reaffirm your, culture. And so these are all lots of beneficial impacts.
My grandparents refused to speak Russian in front of us when we were little, but then when we were older, they had this secret language that they could curse at each other in.
I have a very similar thing in that my mom speaks Japanese and she used to speak Japanese to me when she wanted to talk about my dad. So
how is the quarantine affecting your work?
Yeah, we were in the middle of collecting some longitudinal data. And so we had babies coming in at 3, 9, and 15 months, because we want to look at the trajectory of brain development and behavior. That's been suspended for now. So there are some side effects to a lot of these quarantine and social distancing policies. But I think, first and foremost, we have to make sure everybody's okay. We have a pretty vibrant lab. They're really used to being with each other, bouncing ideas off of each other. And so we've had to change things, hold virtual lab meetings through Zoom, and then, find ways to continue doing research at home or remotely, because I do think it's important to try to do the things that we can, if we're able to, right? If we're not too stressed out, if we're not taking care of a sick person, and find little bits of normalcy and, try to keep connections between one another. And so I have some fabulous students, really, really rock stars who, like yesterday we had a lab Netflix party. And so we all watched, or the people who wanted to watch the documentary Babies, which is a science, documentary. And we watched it together and just had comments. And so we're trying to find ways to continue the science, but then also just really to continue the human connection too.
A lot of parents are at home focusing on their children, but a lot of parents are still working. And I understand your husband is an essential worker at Lenox Hill. Do you have any tips for caregivers trying to do the best for their kids in these unprecedented times?
Yeah, it's a hard question. So, if you have all the caregivers at home and, you're able to be with your, kids, I think that's the best, solution. But we also just do need a lot of people kind of combating the problem right now. And so essential workers at hospitals, clinics, delivery, drivers, people who work at the grocery stores. There's actually a lot of people who are still working right now, and their kids are having to cope with that, and I know with my own family, my husband, again, he's a physician at Lenox Hill. It has been tough because, he is essential. He needs to be working. The idea of him being deployed to COVID shifts is scary for me. Just the idea of having another person not there for my son is also very difficult. So he's already, detached from his friends and neighbors. And so I think losing, his dad for the time being might be very difficult. And so I think, again, just relying on different types of social support. We've reached out to a lot of our friends and family. A lot of our friends and family have reached out to us, providing lots of support. And so I think just relying on each other is the best way forward. Hopefully, and I think we really will get through this, but we're going to have to get through this together.
Natalie, thank you so much for spending time with us.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much to all of you for watching. We're in this together. And all of us here at CUNY TV are going to be here for you with some new shows throughout the quarantine.